The day my bloodline betrayed me. They say family is forever, but forever ended for me on a quiet Sunday morning in Willow Creek, Virginia. The kind of morning where sunlight felt heavy, not warm. I remember sitting in my late father's study, the smell of cedarwood still lingering on his old desk, when my uncle's lawyer slid a crisp white envelope across to me. My hands trembled before I even opened it. Maybe it was instinct, that eerie intuition women have when something is about to break. Inside wasn't what I expected. No comforting letter from Dad, no affirmation of his love, just cold, sterile words. The estate of Charles Whitmore will be transferred to his next of kin, Miss Lila Bennett. Lila Bennett, my cousin. My breath froze in my chest. My cousin, my father's brother's daughter. The golden child. The one who had always been effortlessly adored, effortlessly admired, effortlessly everything. I could hear her laugh echoing through the house even before I saw her, that light, airy sound that used to make me smile, now cutting like glass. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand why, how, but all I could do was stare at that paper, my inheritance stripped from me with a single pen stroke. Dad had promised me the house. The vineyard. The legacy he and Mom built from nothing. I'd been by his side every day of his illness, watched him fade, heard his whispered words. It's all yours, Amelia. Take care of it like I took care of you. So why her name? Why Lila's? When I looked up, she was already standing in the doorway. Perfect posture, tailored ivory coat, eyes filled with something that looked like sympathy but tasted like triumph. Amelia, she said softly, like she was consoling me. I didn't know Uncle Charles changed the will. I swear, I didn't. But her voice was too smooth, too practiced. And her hands, they didn't shake when she took the keys from the lawyer. That's when I knew. It wasn't fate. It wasn't oversight. It was betrayal. She'd been with him those last few days, whispering sweet nothings about family loyalty, about responsibility. I'd been banned from his room after an argument with my uncle, one I never even understood. And in those silent hours, she rewrote my life. When everyone left, I stayed behind. The lawyer, the relatives, even Lila, all gone. The silence of that empty house pressed against my chest like a ghost. My mother's photo sat on the mantel. Her soft eyes seemed to ask me, "What now, my love?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Outside, I saw Lila's car glide down the gravel road, sunlight glinting off her perfect smile as she waved to the neighbors, pretending to be the rightful heir of everything my parents built. And something inside me shifted. Slowly. Coldly. That night, I sat in my father's study again, the envelope open before me, and I promised myself one thing. If she took my inheritance, I'd take everything else she ever valued. Not through blood. Not through crime. But through destiny. I didn't know how, yet, but I'd find her cracks, her weaknesses, her illusions of perfection. I'd make her world unravel, one delicate thread at a time. Because when family betrays you, revenge stops being an act, it becomes a calling. And mine had just begun. The fire that would burn through both our lives was lit that day, and I was done being the good one. Mapping the fractures. The weeks after the will read like a slow-motion montage. Neighbors whispering on porches, polite condolences with nails hidden in the palms, Lila stepping into rooms that once belonged to my father as if she'd been rehearsing for this role her whole life. I watched from the periphery, learning her rhythm the way a hunter learns the patterns of prey. Every public smile, every staged embrace, every perfectly placed Instagram of sunlight on mahogany gave me pieces I could use. I began with the obvious, observation. I moved through the estate like a ghost, cataloging what had been taken and what remained. The vineyard's irrigation map, the deed for the guesthouse, the ledger with names of people my father trusted. Each page a thread that tied Lila to a world she had not earned. I memorized her schedule, the weekly charity events where she flourished under flattering lights, the salon she favored in Richmond where she was known as Lila Whitmore, philanthropist and graceful heiress. It was all theater. Beneath the silk and the speeches, I sensed tension, a brittle bone waiting to splinter. I learned to watch without reacting. The neighbors were my mirrors. They reflected what she wanted them to see. In the small cafe 2 towns over, I overheard a conversation about a loan whose payments had quietly slipped, about a trust fund that had been mismanaged. It was a rumor that tasted like opportunity. I traced the bank transfers, the shell invoices, the names that never articulated themselves until I sat with them in the dim light of my kitchen, tracing ink with a finger as though the lines could rearrange themselves into truth. I didn't touch anything that wasn't mine, but I let my hands turn over every memory and ledger like a detective turning pages at midnight. I found a pattern. Lila lived on borrowed certainty. Her designer dresses were leased. Her gala sponsorships were conditional. The Whitmore Foundation, her new centerpiece, leaned on favors owed rather than wealth owned. She had the looks of an empire without the backbone. The more I peeled back, the clearer the plan became. This would not be a single explosive act. It would be surgical. I would not only strip her of the illusion of permanence, I would rearrange the map of her future so that every route she trusted became a detour. I would trade inheritance for destiny, the people she relied on, the image she curated, the plans she thought unassailable. I would not burn what she loved. I would reroute it, repurpose it, make it belong to the truth. First, I needed leverage. Not blackmail or threats. Those were cheap and corrosive. I wanted leverage that looked like inevitability. I started with a small but fatal truth. Lila feared exposure more than loss. Her brand depended on being flawless. A crack in that facade would invite vultures. So I loaded the chamber with whispers that could become facts. There were moments when the plan felt unbearable. Walking past the nursery where my mother had planted pink hydrangeas, touching the gate's wrought iron and feeling the historic weight of promises. But beneath the grief, an urgent clarity grew. My father had taught me to tend the vineyard, to read the soil by feel and not by forecast. That same instinct guided me now. Read the land, understand where the roots could be loosened. I became an expert in small violences, a redirected email, an anonymous tip to a journalist about graft at one of Lila's sponsored charities, a late-night call to a creditor reminded of an overdue balance. Each act was a pebble, and each pebble rolled toward an avalanche. I watched her flinch at the fringes, a cancelled sponsorship here, a columnist's curiosity there. She polished her smile and moved forward as if nothing had happened, but I saw the tremor in the way she held her hands. There were allies I did not expect, an old gardener who remembered my father's kindness, a former employee of the foundation who'd been pushed out quietly, a bank clerk too weary to lie. I took them gently, like a gardener encouraging reluctant sprouts. They gave me proof and permission. They gave me names that fit with the ledger lines I'd already traced. And then, one late autumn night, when frost had begun lacing the vineyard and the house exhaled a loneliness only the dead understand, I found something that altered everything. A single document tucked inside an old ledger, a letter unsigned, a faint accounting that suggested Lila had not been an accidental beneficiary but a beneficiary of design. It hinted at meetings, at phone calls logged at hours where my father slept, at payments that smelled of planning. I read it under the low kitchen light until my eyes burned. The paper was brittle, but the ink still had the weight of intention. The thought that had been a cold ember inside me flared to life. This was not merely greed. This was a plan, and it had a map. If I followed that map, I could unravel not just her claim to a house, but the path she intended to walk for the rest of her life. The next morning I woke with a new certainty, the kind that sits in the bones and does not ask permission. My hands were steady. My mouth formed no promises. My mind catalogued actions. The destiny I would take would not be accidental revenge. It would be a measured, poetic return. She would lose the future she had stolen, not through spectacle, but through inevitability. As dawn broke over the rows of vines, something else came into view. Lila, on the estate's veranda, phone pressed to her ear, laughing in that practiced thin way. She did not see me in the shadowed doorway. She did not know the ledger had been read, the document discovered, the first syllables of her unraveling written. I stepped out of the doorway with the letter folded in my pocket and felt the weight of what I must become. Not cruel. Not petty. Precise. The first piece was set in motion, and she would not be ready for the consequence I had planned. The art of becoming her. Revenge doesn't happen overnight. It grows quietly, like ivy on an old house, wrapping tighter, feeding on every crack until it becomes the structure itself. By winter, I'd learned everything there was to know about Lila Bennett, the woman who wore my father's name like a trophy. Her life was built on borrowed mirrors. The Whitmore estate had become her stage, but her foundation, her contacts, her friendships, all of it, were fragile glass. I could see how she curated every post, every outfit, every speech to craft the illusion of control. But underneath, there was panic. She was trying to live a destiny she didn't understand. And that was my opening. I started to study her the way she once studied me. Her gestures, her tone, her words. The way she laughed at charity dinners, light, but never too loud. The way she used empathy like currency, touching someone's arm just enough to make them feel seen, but not enough to feel known. I didn't plan to destroy her from the outside. No, I would become her reflection. If she could steal my inheritance, I would steal her identity's gravity, her influence, her voice, her place in the world. Because sometimes, revenge isn't about taking what's yours. It's about making the thief irrelevant. I began with her foundation, the Lila Bennett Trust for Families. It looked polished online, but behind the donations and press releases, I found unpaid vendors, mismanaged grants, and a looming IRS audit. I knew if I could quietly align myself with the same charities, but run them better, her credibility would start to fracture naturally. So I did. Using the savings I'd built while caring for my father, I started the Whitmore Legacy Fund. Same causes. Same families. But I didn't advertise it. I let people discover it. Slowly. Organically. The name Amelia Whitmore began to circulate again, whispered in the same rooms Lila once dominated. Edith's confront her. Not yet. I wanted her to feel it, the slow erosion of spotlight. By spring, her sponsorship for the annual Gala for Hope was politely reassigned to me. She smiled publicly, but her jaw tightened when she congratulated me. That was my first small victory, seeing her mask slip, even for a second. And while she smiled for the cameras, I started weaving threads behind the scenes. I reached out to her PR manager, offering collaboration. I met her board members, by coincidence, at conferences. I complimented her, praised her, and then subtly outperformed her. It wasn't a war. It was a quiet replacement. Soon, she began to lose control of the narrative. The media that once called her the face of modern philanthropy now began comparing us, two Whitmore cousins, carrying the same legacy. Except one was real. One was built on love and labor. And the other? On lies. But I wasn't satisfied. Not yet. The document I'd found, that brittle letter with inked meetings and bribes, still haunted me. It was proof that my uncle, Lila's father, had convinced my dying dad to change the will under the guise of family protection. My father had been manipulated, weakened by medication and fear, and they took advantage of that. That knowledge burned like acid. But it also gave me clarity. This wasn't just about reclaiming inheritance. It was about reclaiming truth. So I went back to the source, the one man who had been there in those final weeks, Dr. Miles Hartman, my father's physician. It took months to get a meeting. When I finally did, he looked older, heavier, like the years had carried guilt. He hesitated when I asked. His silence spoke louder than words. And then, quietly, he said, he didn't know what he was signing, Amelia. That sentence broke something in me, and built something else. My Vater hadn't betrayed me. He'd been betrayed too. I walked out of that office with a new kind of storm inside me. My revenge had changed shape. It wasn't about hurting her anymore. It was about exposing her. Completely. And for that, I needed the world to see her the way I did. So I began planting seeds, small truths wrapped in kindness. I gave subtle interviews about integrity in legacy giving. I spoke about truth, transparency, and the importance of honoring promises. Each word was a mirror pointed in her direction, and she felt it. By the time summer came, her confidence began to crack. Her board was restless, donors whispered doubts, journalists started asking the right questions. Lila was losing her crown. And the best part? I hadn't laid a single finger on her. She was unraveling under the weight of her own deception, and I was standing where she once stood, smiling quietly, the camera lights catching me instead of her. But revenge, I would soon learn, doesn't end when you win the spotlight. It ends when the truth comes home. And destiny was still waiting to be rewritten. The collapse of her kingdom. By the time autumn rolled around, The air in Willow Creek carried a different weight. The vineyard had begun to breathe again. Vines reclaiming life after years of neglect, sunlight returning through open windows I had once closed in grief. But somewhere across town, Lila Bennett's world was collapsing. Slowly, elegantly, and publicly. It began with whispers, the kind that don't shout, but spread like perfume. A local paper published a brief article questioning the financial transparency of the Lila Bennett Trust for Families. It was small, almost forgettable. But 2 days later, a larger publication picked it up, asking about potential conflicts of interest. Within a week, 3 sponsors quietly pulled their funding. And within a month, Lila's name was no longer synonymous with grace. It was synonymous with questions. I didn't celebrate. I observed. Because this was never about humiliation. It was about balance. Still, there was a kind of quiet satisfaction in watching her perfection unravel. Her publicist resigned. Her foundation accountant disappeared overseas. Every day she fought to hold the pieces together with press statements and smiles, but behind the camera, she was crumbling. The same people who once adored her now avoided her calls. Meanwhile, I stayed silent. Graceful. Grounded. I gave speeches about truth in legacy, about the strength of honest roots. I never mentioned her name. I didn't have to. The world connected the dots on its own. Then came the gala, the same event she had once hosted, now under my name. The Whitmore Legacy Gala. The night felt like poetry written in gold and quiet vengeance. I remember standing at the top of the marble stairs in a simple black gown. Nothing extravagant, just timeless. Cameras flashed. The air was warm with chatter and champagne. And then I saw her, standing near the entrance trying to smile. Lila looked different now. The gloss was gone. The mask had cracks. Her eyes searched the room like someone looking for a lifeline. Wie in our eyes meet, the noise of the room vanished. For a moment, I felt the ghost of who we were as children. Summers spent chasing fireflies, braiding flowers into each other's hair, dreaming of futures that never involved betrayal. But then the image of that white envelope, the will, her smile, the way she took my father's legacy, rushed back, erasing every trace of nostalgia. She approached, her voice trembling under its practiced tone. You've built quite the empire, Amelia. I smiled faintly. No. Just rebuilt what was already mine. The words hung between us, soft but heavy. She wanted to say something, maybe explain, maybe plead, but the cameras turned toward us and she froze. That's when I realized what true revenge looked like. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fire. It was silence, the kind that exposes truth without a single scream. Because everyone in that room saw it. The shift. The torch. The fall. After the event, I stepped out into the cool night. The vineyard lights flickered softly in the distance, the land breathing again. I thought it was over. I thought I had won. But destiny has a strange sense of irony. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. The handwriting was shaky, older, careful. It was from my uncle. Amelia, I need to see you. It's time you knew everything. I almost tore it up. I didn't owe him my presence, not after what he'd done. But something about the way he wrote, fragile, remorseful, pulled me in. So I went. His house was smaller now, tucked on the edge of town. He looked thinner, his skin pale, eyes sunken with guilt. He coughed when he saw me, the kind of cough that comes from deep inside, from regret too long unspoken. I didn't know how far it would go, he said. I wanted to protect her, Amelia. She wasn't supposed to take everything. Your father. He was confused. We just wanted to make sure she had something. But she changed it all. His hands shook as he handed me another document. One my father had signed days before his death. It wasn't a will. It was a trust amendment. It stated that if anything happened to Lila, financial ruin, criminal investigation, or public scandal, full control of all Whitmore assets would revert to Amelia Whitmore. I froze. The irony was cruel. In taking her destiny, I had unknowingly fulfilled my father's last safeguard, his silent attempt to protect me. By destroying her empire, I had triggered my inheritance. For a long time, I couldn't speak. The room spun, not from guilt, but from the realization that my revenge wasn't vengeance at all, it was completion. My father had written fate into law. All I did was play my part. I looked at my uncle one last time, the man who started this storm. You thought you took my legacy, I whispered, but all you did was delay it. He nodded, tears spilling. She'll come to you, Amelia, when she has nowhere else to go. And he was right. Because 2 nights later, past midnight in the rain, Lila showed up at my door. Shaking. Soaked. Broken. Her eyes, once full of vanity, were now hollow. I have nothing left, she said. They froze my accounts. The board resigned. They're investigating everything. I stood there in silence, feeling the weight of every moment between us, the years, the betrayal, the justice. She looked up, her voice barely a whisper. Please, help me. And in that moment, I realized the cruelest truth of all. Revenge doesn't always end in satisfaction. Sometimes it ends in choice. Do you let your enemy drown? Or do you become the person they failed to be? I looked at her trembling, drenched, desperate, and whispered, come inside. But my heart knew, the story wasn't finished yet. The final inheritance. Rain dripped from the edges of her coat, pooling on the marble floor like pieces of her pride melting away. Lila stood in the doorway, the same doorway I once watched her cross as the heiress of everything that should have been mine. Now she was the ghost of her own empire. I led her into the study, my father's study, where this all began. The air still smelled faintly of cedar and memory. She shivered as thunder rolled outside, her reflection flickering in the window's dark glass. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. Her eyes landed on the portrait of my father above the fireplace. He believed in me, she whispered, voice trembling. He said I could make something good with it. I thought, if I made it bigger, if I made it shine, maybe I'd be enough. There it was. The truth I'd waited years to hear. It wasn't greed. It was emptiness disguised as ambition. I took a slow breath. You had everything, Lila.
Everything I lost. And you still wanted more.
She looked up, eyes glassy with guilt. I wanted to be you, Amelia. The daughter he loved most.
The one Everione trusted.
I thought, if I built something great, I'd finally matter. It hit me then, the cruel symmetry. She had stolen my inheritance trying to feel worthy, and I had stolen her destiny trying to make her pay. 2 women chained to the same need, to be seen, to be enough.
I sat down, motioning vorher 2 dose Same.
You didn't just take money, Lila. You rewrote blood. You turned love into transaction. She nodded, tears falling. I know. And now I'm paying for it. They're going to press charges. The audits, the fraud claims.
Her voice cracked. Amelia, I can't survive this.
I watched her for a long time, my pulse steady, my heart heavy. She deserved ruin. But somewhere deep inside, I felt my father's voice again. Calm, kind, reminding me that justice without mercy becomes just another form of cruelty. I stood and walked to the window. The rain had softened, becoming a mist.
The vineyard lights shimmered through it like fireflies.
You took everything I had, I said quietly.
And yet standing here now, I realize, it never belonged to you.
You were holding something that was already dying in your hands. She looked at me, confused. What do you mean? I turned toward her. Legacy isn't property, Lila. It's character. It's the way the world remembers your name when you're not here to defend it. You lost that long before I ever touched it. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. I let her cry. And then, when the silence finally settled between us, I did the one thing she never would have done for me. I forgave her. Not out of kindness, but out of power. Tomorrow, I said, my tone steady, I'll call my attorney. I'll make sure the investigation clears you enough to start over. But you'll leave this town, Lila. The Whitmore name ends with me. She looked up in disbelief. You'd do that? I nodded once. Because I can. Her lips trembled. Why? I stepped closer, my voice soft, but laced with finality. Because I refuse to become you. For the first time, she broke, not from loss, but from recognition. She understood. Revenge had boundaries, but redemption required surrender. When she left that night, she didn't look back. The sound of her car faded down the gravel road until the only thing left was silence and the steady hum of the rain. I stood by the window long after she disappeared, watching the land my parents built, alive again, breathing again, finally at peace. The next morning, the sun rose over the vineyard in a wash of gold. Birds returned to the fences. Workers smiled when they saw me walking the fields barefoot, like my father used to. In my pocket, I still carried the old letter, his safeguard, his faith in me. I ran my fingers across the ink, whispering to the wind, "You were right, Dad." It all came back. I didn't need revenge anymore. I'd already taken something far greater than Lila ever could, my destiny, my name, my peace. Years later, when people spoke of the Whitmore family, they didn't mention scandal or betrayal. They spoke of legacy, of how a woman rebuilt what was broken without losing her soul. And that, I realized, was the real inheritance all along. Not land, not money, but the power to rise without hate. Because sometimes, taking someone's destiny doesn't mean destroying theirs. It means reclaiming your own. And in the end, the Whitmore name didn't die. It lived, quietly, beautifully, through me.